friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask-us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Well, howdy everyone. Welcome to the Rewind podcast. Excited to be back to this week, and I got Pastor Derek here with us on the podcast today. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Daryl. How are you doing? Getting used to the weather temperature's been okay, but it's definitely November, gray and dark.
It sure is. And it feels like November in this room right now. I don't know what the temperature is at this end of the church, but you're wearing a hoodie. I'm not.
You're wearing a polo top.
This might be an overstatement, but we might wrap up this podcast a little faster than usual. We'll see.
Should have worn my flannels.
We'll make sure that we're paying our heating bill. Okay. Anyways, welcome to the podcast. So Derek, last week you were off. You were somewhere.
Yeah, I wasn't off. I was representing our church in Niagara Falls at our Fellowship National Convention.
All right, yeah. National Convention.
Once a year. The denomination that we're a part of calls all of the churches together, and we discuss some stuff. There's just like church, we've got a business meeting where there's some business we have to pass. There's some of that stuff. There's some workshops. There's some networking with other churches, and then whatever else gets put on the agenda.
Yeah. Awesome. Give us your 10-second review of that conference you're at.
Yeah, I think I was telling you, I thought it was really encouraging. We talked about some important things, but I thought they were talked about in a way where people were free to have dialogue and discuss and have different ideas, but did so in a way that I think reflected Jesus and the heart of Jesus. And I think that's what we ought to look like as a church, that we can have unity amongst diversity.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. So anyways, for our listeners, if you don't know, we're part of the fellowship, over 500 churches all across Canada, and always encouraging to hear those reports on pastors and church leaders gathering together and thinking through things at a high level. And so glad you were able to represent Forward at that event this past week. But this Sunday, we jumped into kind of the conclusion to our series.
A little bit like the extension handles. It was all kind of like,
it's the after credits.
It's an after credits scene. I like to think of it as what we talked about on Sunday is putting some real tangible handles on how we see ourselves as a community, as a congregation, living out the mission that we've been talking about in the year that lies ahead.
Yeah. So before we jump into what the message was all about and everything like that, you started off the message on Sunday with a little bit of a lament.
A lament. That's a good way to put it. A lament.
Your favorite, your team.
Yeah.
The Dallas Cowboys.
They say that the opposite of love isn't hatred; it's apathy. So I have a lot of hatred for my team right now. They played last night, and it was just another train wreck gong show.
All right, they did not hear your pleas from the pulpit.
I looked at Amanda and I was like, I can't. I'm gonna be sick to my stomach watching this team play.
Okay, all right. Well,
so let's not talk about. I don't want to talk about them.
Well, for our listeners, this will not come as a surprise for anyone who knows me. I'm not a huge football fan. Yep. Okay, like that's not a surprise. But I know about football. Mm-hmm. Like I've heard that it's a thing.
It is, yeah.
I've heard it's popular amongst certain states.
Yep.
And I'm a little bit younger than you, but in my mind still, it can't be I can't shake it. But in my mind, the Dallas Cowboys are still like the best team out there because when I was young, they were, right? Like they were on top.
Listen, if you're into making money, let me tell you, the Dallas Cowboys are still the number one franchise out there. Most valuable sports franchise in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Worth billions and billions and billions of dollars.
Wow.
So they're a money-making machine, but
that doesn't translate.
They're not a machine on the field.
Anyways, for someone who hasn't watched the football in ever, I've never watched it. For some reason, it's still ingrained in my mind.
This is why. See, they've done it. They've done the job, haven't they?
Yeah.
Even
Apparently. So, with all that being said, so I have no memories of watching the Dallas. Share with me a favorite memory of watching why, because you saw like you're born into it, like this is your team, even though like they're not performing, they're not doing it right now. Do you have a favorite memory where you look back, you're like, this is why this has been my
team? I mean, so I mentioned that I really got into football when I was playing football as a teenager in high school, and I played running back. This is gonna be so boring for some people, so I'm gonna make it really quick. I'm sorry in advance. The Dallas Cowboys have had one of the greatest running backs to ever play the game. His name was Emmitt Smith. Incredibly durable, great runner, played through pain. One of my best memories is watching a game that he played. I think it was the NFC Championship game where he rushed for like 165 yards with a fully dislocated shoulder. And his arm was basically hanging limp, and he was still running with power through. And I wore number 22 because that was Emmitt Smith's number. So I wore it in homage to him.
There you go.
That's my memory.
There you go. All right. Well, I'll tie it in with our series, our message from Sunday. Yeah. So, like you said, like you have these fond memories of this team, and nowadays, they're not quite doing the way that they're not quite performing the way you would hope that they would. And here's the thing, like we're talking about the church and the mission of the church. Yep. And I think like that's a helpful analogy when we think about like what is the church doing and where have we been and where are we going. What we want to make sure is that we never look back at the church and be like, hey, the good old days. Like this is when we were doing it right. Yep. Where whatever it is for you, where it's like, I know if only we could go back to how things were in the 90s or the 70s or whatever it is. And when I talk with people, like there's especially for those who've been in the church for a long time, sometimes we look back in nostalgia of like, oh, this moment. And here's the thing, like often like that was like a really meaningful moment in that person's life. But as we're talking about this idea of multiply, the thing that gets me excited is we're not just looking back to the past, let's get back there, but hey, like where are we going from here? What is God's vision for the church? What is his mission for us moving forward? And I think like that's so important as we think about like what are we engaged with right now? So we're not looking backwards per se, wishing it was the good old days, but instead this series and this message is now saying, hey, like what's tomorrow going to hold, and how do we individually and as a church, what role are we going to be playing in God's vision for the church overall? So I want us to dive into it here a little bit more as we're talking about multiply and the Christmas offering. So this message, I have it written down here. Really, a big part of it we're talking about is the gospel. As you said in your message on Sunday, Jesus came. Can save everyone and anyone. Jesus can save anyone, and everyone who calls on Jesus will be saved. Yeah. That's a huge point, and I had a very, very similar point in my message as well. And so as we're talking about this idea of the gospel and of being saved, I just want to unpack that a little bit more. Because I think that this is one of those things that can easily become a phrase in Christianity, where you just got to be saved. So can you unpack that a little bit more? Like, is that all that Christianity is this idea of being saved? Help us to unpack that so it doesn't just become a cliche, a Christian word.
Yeah, I think probably the danger of how we often understand it, maybe especially if you grew up in church, is to think that salvation as only a fixed point in time.
Okay. Yep.
That it's just about crossing that threshold from I'm a sinner condemned to hell to now through Jesus I will receive eternal life forever. And there's no understanding of the work that I think also is included in that idea of, he says, Paul says in chapter 10, that this confessing with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, believing in our heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Then he says, one believes with the heart resulting in righteousness, one confesses with the mouth resulting in salvation, not understanding that the salvation is really the new life that we enter into. It's not like the salvation was just that point in time where I was saved, but it is this work that now God continues in me to make me new, to transform me, to what we call sanctification, to sanctify me and make me more like Jesus, that there is new life here and a better life here through Jesus and life forever with him in eternity. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a danger in understanding the gospel is simply about how do you escape hell,
right?
Or how do you get to heaven?
Yeah,
and that's where I think we end up with a shallow understanding of salvation.
Yeah, it makes me think of when I was really young in my church. They had this rack on the wall of tracts. If you guys remember those, these little cards that you can, great intention, this little thing that you could hand to someone to explain the gospel. Great intentions behind it. Some were done better than others. And this one that I just really remember, flames and like person in the flames. And it's just said like really brightly on there, fire insurance. So it was all just like, this is how you escape hell.
Yeah.
And again, like I think good intentions. There's this idea, certainly, that salvation is so we don't go to hell.
Yeah.
So we don't
receive condemnation.
Judgment.
And
judgment. Yeah. Like but this idea of being saved, I think is such a simple, easy word to say that incorporates that and everything else that you just said.
I think this is where, like, when you think about the confession that Paul is talking about here, I think we underplay the extent of what Paul is saying because it sounds really, it's three words. Mm-hmm. Confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot in that if you confess with your mouth that is true and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. Like, that sounds like a formula, but it's less of a formula and more of a rule of life, right?
Okay, yeah.
Jesus is Lord is a affirmation that Jesus is God, that Jesus rules and reigns over all things, which by default includes me. Mm-hmm. And putting myself under the rule and reign of Jesus as King means everything. Mm-hmm. In my life becomes different.
Yeah. I think that's helpful when you say like it can come across as a formula.
Yeah.
And the way I take that is, it's almost like, and we never want Christianity where it's just like these magic words.
Yeah.
Where you just say like a certain line, and then this thing happens. It's less of that and more, as he said, is a way of life.
Yeah.
The confessing Jesus is Lord, which Paul is writing to the Romans, writing to a church in Rome where they would have said Caesar is Lord.
Right.
It would have been very much politically charged.
Yep.
Which it's important for us to understand, especially back then. Politics and religion were just so intertwined.
Yeah.
You can't
Hand in hand.
You can't say one without also implying the other.
Yeah.
There was no real separation between the two. So to say that Caesar's Lord is to say not only is he your political leader, he's also in many ways he is your sovereign. He is your
and Caesar was a godlike character.
Yeah. So set up like that in so many ways, even how they did architecture and everything of how they viewed this type of thing of leadership.
Yeah.
And so Paul is obviously tapping into something at this point too, that is very subversive and very offensive to anyone who would be reading that, who maybe they're on board with Jesus, but they were also very much on board with what was going on in Rome.
Yeah.
And so now they're reading this in the hot seat of like the part of the empire where they're reading this, realizing, oh, okay, there's something really profound, provocative about what Jesus is saying and who he is. And as you said, this actually impacts the way that we live our lives.
This is what when especially early in the church, when persecutions were going on in the church, what was asked of Christians in order to avoid martyrdom, in order to avoid persecution, was that they would renounce the fact that Jesus is Lord and instead say Caesar is Lord. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is all about allegiance of my heart and my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so as we think through this idea of what does it mean to be saved, as you shared on Sunday, was this idea of it's meant to impact our lives, but I think there's also this idea in this passage we also need to wrestle through as well, is that it also kind of saves us from this perspective that following Jesus is also something that we accomplish, that it's a work that we do.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like, let's unpack that a little bit more. Like, how do we make sure that we're living for Jesus, but not trying to earn something in our salvation? How do we separate those two things?
Yeah, I think the work of the Christian life is submission. It's submission to allow God to do the work that he wants to do in us. That in some ways is hard work, in some ways is no work at all. We don't do the work of our transformation, but we do the work of releasing our hands to various areas of our life and giving God permission to enter in and do the work. And that unclenching of our hands, that submission of our lives, that is the painful hard work to us who are egocentric, who still in so many areas of our life cling to the illusion that we actually are in control. We actually do call the shots. We want to hold on to that power that Satan promised to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? You will, if you take the fruit, you will be like God. And it was transformative for me in my own life growing up and growing up in the church, but thinking, but now I got to try really hard to fix these things in myself. Like Jesus saved me, now I sanctify me. To recognize, no, Jesus saves me and sanctifies me. He saves me through grace alone. He sanctifies me through grace alone. And both of those realities only come through my willingness to receive what he alone can do. So that I think is how, that's how I think about it. It's helpful for me is to come and recognize when I can't fix things about me. Only God can make me new through Jesus Christ. But I have to, he won't come in and do what I hold back from him and give him no permission to enter into.
Yeah. In this whole conversation, it keeps on bringing me back to this idea of we want to make sure that we're not thinking of this idea of salvation as, you say a prayer, now you're saved, you're in, and so now you attend church to kind of continue to keep your membership in the club, just like, just gotta make sure you show up so there's no questions. So, and instead it's more like how Dallas Willard explained it of, that we're apprenticing ourselves to Jesus. And we use the word, not apprentice, but disciple. In this idea of, hey, like we're engaged in all of this, so that we are becoming more like Jesus. That doesn't, save us, but it sanctifies us in this process. This is what we're pursuing as we continue to study his word. And as you said, as we submit ourselves to his lordship.
Yeah, I think depending on what strand of church you've grown up in, myself growing up in what I would say was fundamentalist evangelical church. There was, I think, more implicit rather than explicit. So it was just more caught than taught that the gospel is the starting point, and we have to get to the starting point. Then we got to figure it out from there. So the gospel is like the ABCs of faith.
Yeah,
and coming to a realization that the gospel is not the ABCs of faith. The gospel is the A to Z of faith. It is the totality of how I am saved and how I am sanctified, that the Christian life is about living out the implications of that gospel and figuring out and allowing God to work in and through me, not just to save me by Jesus, but to make me more like Jesus.
I think that's a really helpful way in describing what the gospel is, how it applies to all of life. And on Sunday, the way that you described it was this call to being all in.
Yeah.
That being all in is foundational and not an optional add-on. It's not this, hey, that's for some people. That's for the super Christians over there. Yeah. But instead, being all in is something that we're called to as a foundational, kind of as you said, it's not just the starting point, but it is the sum total of our discipleship journey. And so, as he said, that we're called to be disciples who love God, love others, and serve the world. And we're called to also make disciples who love God, love others, and serve the world. For our listeners, if you want to unpack that more, well, we just did 4 messages on all of that, so we're not going to spend time on that. Yeah. But this idea of being all in, I think is really helpful as we kind of unpack our Christmas offering, the Christmas projects that we are doing this year. In my message at Kitchener, I kind of addressed it by talking about that there's obstacles to the gospel. That there are things both external in the world and there are things internal, both in the church as well, that we need to be aware of, that Paul is addressing in Romans chapter 10, talking about these obstacles that prevent this thing from happening. That stop the idea of going and making disciples. And so I find it really helpful that Paul addresses it in this passage, because otherwise we might think that there's something odd. Like there's something wrong in Canadian society of what's in the way, and it's maybe it's a little too easy to say that the world is just against the gospel from going out. That it's because of certain policies or something like that. Like it would be so much easier if we lived in another province or another country where the gospel just goes. But instead, Paul is saying, like, hey, here's reality, that in every corner of the earth, wherever we are, that there will be obstacles that stand in the way. These are obstacles, and hopefully this isn't deflating for anyone. These obstacles will always be there. So it'll be something that we will always need to be attentive towards, but they're not insurmountable obstacles. They're not something. It's not something that Paul is saying at the end. He's like, and therefore give up. It's just all hard. But no, he's saying, hey, here are the things that are going to stand in the way, and here's what we need to do as a church in order to address these obstacles. So on Sunday, I kind of addressed it in 3 different ways. The first one is this idea of that there's no opportunities to hear the gospel. And so I kind of want to tie each one of these into our Christmas projects and just kind of play out for everyone, like, why did we choose these projects? Why are these the things that we're focusing on right now? And specifically in our context right here in Ontario and in this region, what are the specific challenges we're facing? So in this, I think we can attach the opportunities to hear are the ideas of having camps and the idea of planting churches. So let's just talk about that for a little bit of why is camp important? Then we'll talk about planting churches. But let's start off with camp. Let's just unpack, like, why is that a significant thing that we would fund and focus our attention on?
So I asked on Sunday for people to raise their hand if they came to faith before the age of 13. And I think it probably in the neighborhood of 70% of people put up their hand. And that statistically tracks with what we know, that most people who will make a decision to follow Jesus will do so in their formative years. Beyond that, it tracks with what Jesus himself has to say about the nature of faith, and that even as adults, if we're going to come to faith, there's a childlike faith that's required in order to come to him, right? So ministry to kids in church is both the biggest evangelical ministry of any church and the biggest discipleship and teaching people how to grow and be like Jesus ministry in the church. Camp gives us an opportunity. We have more than 50% of our campers come from families, not just that go to not to our church, but that are completely not affiliated with any church. We ask every camper who comes to fill out, do you attend Forward? Do you attend another church in the area? And over 50% of those who attend mark off they attend no church. So this is an unbelievable opportunity for us to share the gospel with kids who are the most fertile ground and the most reaching them at the most important time in their life with the most important message. And beyond that, we have seen how camp ministry often becomes an inroad to then parents and the entire family. So we've had entire families, like I said on Sunday, who have ended up here at Forward Church, who have come to faith in Jesus Christ because the kids started going to camp.
Yeah.
We have a ton of families, a ton of kids who come from Kitchener every year who are part of our Camp Forward reality, a busload every week of campers coming from Kitchener and taking part in Camp Forward. So it is really one of those both sites things that's so neat to watch.
I don't know how it happens every year, but at the beginning of camp, it always catches me off guard. Certainly not other people who are way more involved in actually running the camp. But every year it seems like that first week or so, for some reason, I forget that camp is starting that week. And I'll just be working away at the Kitchener site. I'll be answering emails. And all of a sudden this bus shows up. I'm like, why is a bus outside? And then all of a sudden the entire space is just swarming with kids. I'm like, oh yeah, camp started this week.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I forgot. It's beginning camp season, and it's really fun just seeing all these kids swarm that place, getting ready to get picked up at the end of the day, and how excited they were about all the different things they're involved in with camp that day and for the entire week. And so, it seems like this is such a foundational thing as we think about the gospel going into the world, and we think about issues in the world and culture wars and all these things. Like, so often it sounds like we deal with these at such a high level, and yet the church's response can be so simple but what if we just explain the gospel? If we just bring people in who are who live in our area, who are just local, in the region around us, that we would be involved in doing this. And it obviously, year over year, this has made a huge impact in people's lives. So the other thing that we're also supporting is planting churches.
Planting new churches.
And obviously this is a huge initiative for us. You mentioned on Sunday the fact that this is, I think, the first Sunday.
Very first Sunday we would have been meeting as a church in 4 different locations.
4 locations. Okay, so I want you to unpack a little bit of that journey of how we got to that point.
Sure.
Of how do we have 4 different services, 4 locations, and then we can unpack a little bit more of why is starting new sites and planting churches such an important aspect of spreading the gospel. So how do we get to the point where this Sunday we could celebrate that?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start by going way back to my own starting here at Forward. That back in 2011, what was then just Forward Cambridge. And the leadership and Pastor Steve, the elders board, felt like God was calling forward to start 2 new locations, one in Kitchener and one in Guelph. And I came on board to start our Kitchener location, and James Bast, who's now over at Grandview Baptist Church in Kitchener, he and his wife Karen came on to start our Guelph location. I should say Amanda and I and our kids came on to start Kitchener, because I just said James and Karen. And that church has now become, through merging with another church plant that started about a year later, Church of the City. Interestingly enough, pastored by Pastor Spencer Adams, Pastor Steve's son, who is leading the charge there. And that church is doing great things for the gospel. And we absolutely praise God for that, and for just seeds that were planted there that have now become Church of the City and become their own thing, their own entity. And we celebrate that. And then for the last now, however many years, I've lost track. I guess we launched in 2012, both those locations. So now the last 12 years, we had kind of been there at 3 and then 2 locations. And starting last year, well, before that, we had been praying over and considering where God would lead us. It was part of the strategic plan that the elders and Pastor Kirk and I had put together for the church. We thought it would happen around year 5, and God fast forwarded some of those plans, but got introduced to Pastor Khalil, who was going to be moving into Canada with a desire to start a church to reach Arabic-speaking people through a mutual friend, Pastor Bashara. And God, we just kept on taking steps. God opened the doors and very clearly said, hey, I want you guys to be a part of supporting this. At the same time, have been walking along with Pastor Andrew and his wife Laura and their family as they were considering what God had for them in ministry next, and praying and thinking about, is it church planting? They came to a point where they were like, it's church planting, and it's church planting in Paris. And we said, hey, let's do this together. And so long story short, in October, we launched a Arabic congregation that meets at the same time as our English-speaking congregations in both Kitchener and Cambridge, but meets in what used to be the Youth-Aud, now is the Myers Road Auditorium here in Cambridge. And on Sunday, we had our first soft launch service. So soft launch service is helping just work out any of the kinks before we fully open the doors to the community. Had our core team in Paris on Sunday at the facility we're going to be meeting in, setting up all of their equipment, running through all of the systems, and then doing a short service together. And we actually had Jen Pent was telling me, we had a first-time visitor card filled out because somebody had walked in from outside and came into the soft launch service on Sunday, filled out a first-time visitor card in our soft launch service. So fantastic. But really, we have a bunch of people who were already down in that area as well, and we want to see our people be able to live on mission where they are. And it's hard when you're, attending a bunch of programs and services that are 20, 25 minutes away to invite somebody else who's new along with you.
Right.
So how do we do that and encourage people to live on mission if we've got a whole bunch of people who are coming from Brantford, Paris, and closer to that area? We really felt like, hey, I think we should have a service that is running there so people can better live on mission, making disciples of Jesus who love God, love others, and serve the world in their own backyard.
Yeah. Thanks for that summary. I think that's so helpful to understand what God has been doing. And you took us back over 12 years ago now of how that kind of got started with 2 sites back then. And now we have 4 sites that are going to be up and running very, very soon. And all that's really exciting, just hearing that none of this was all part of some grand master plan that you have on your whiteboard, all perfectly mapped out. Time and time again, God has shown up at all the different twists and turns of leading us to this point. And God will continue to lead us in the in the coming years beyond here. But on Sunday, you made a really good distinction. I think it's helpful at this point to draw attention back to, is that we're not just merely called to, as you said, addition, but to multiplication.
Yeah.
And so as we think about that question, that someone might be listening to this and they'd be like, why are we doing this? Why are we planting churches? I think it maybe is easy to think through the idea of if you have 100 people in the room, you want to grow to 200 and you want to grow to 400 and just continue to see the church grow.
Yep.
That's addition, right?
Yep.
So help us understand, like, why is it multiplication than just is it versus addition? Is it also addition? Like, explain that a little bit more for us.
Sure. I mean, as we multiply out, our hope is that all of these locations, all of these sites are growing. If it was just about adding people into an auditorium in a single location, you can only add, and you're just reaching a certain pool of people. As we started a church in Kitchener and in Guelph and in Brant County, or into a different language group, we're opening the doors to new people, new pools of people being reached. If you have one church location that adds, let's say, 20 people in a few months, that's great. We should celebrate that. But there's a lot more lost people that we need to reach than that. And if you have now 3 other locations that, that may be a little smaller, maybe they're even reaching more people. In fact, statistically, here's what I would say we know is new churches statistically reach more lost people and baptize more people on a per capita basis than established churches. They're going into new places, new fields, reaching new people. So if we had 20 people here and then 10 people in our Arabic service and 10 people in Kitchener and 10 people in Brant County, then now the growth is much more than if we had a single location that was just adding people.
And when you share numbers like that, and we think through, like, and I appreciate you bringing us back to that really helpful information that new churches tend to do a better job at reaching the lost.
Yeah.
And we can really get into the numbers on everything. And I think for some people, when we start talking about numbers, we instinctively kind of push against that.
Sure.
Right? Like Christianity isn't all about numbers. So
I get that.
It's important that we're not. What's the distinction? I'll put it as a question of we're not building an organization.
No.
We're doing something different. And so numbers help us understand why numbers matter.
Yeah, numbers matter because numbers represent people, and people matter to the heart of God, right? So every one of those numbers is an individual soul, an individual person created in the image of God who Jesus died for. I get the understandable pushback. I don't want to talk about a business model.
Yeah.
But the idea that Jesus isn't interested in numbers is bonkers.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus came to save people.
Yeah.
And listen, there are times where you can faithfully minister and preach the word of God and just not see the numerical fruit in that. I know that. But over time, healthy things grow. They bear fruit. It's not always a direct A to B, but we should long for more people to respond to the gospel.
Yeah.
We should long for more churches to be planted. We should long for every church in our region to be overflowing with people and with new salvation, with baptisms. That should be our heart because it represents people.
Yeah. And I think that when we talk about what Forward Church is doing, that this isn't a a plan that got cooked up by you and Kirk and the elder board. But this is why we're rooting it in this passage, that in Scripture, the plan is that we would multiply.
Yeah.
This is what Paul is calling us to. He's clearly saying he wants more people would hear the gospel and would respond to it. And though this might look different at different areas of the world and different time periods, it's all going to be contextualized, but the mission stays the same.
Yep.
And the reason why Forward exists is because at some point, someone had this vision of planting a church 90 years ago. It didn't just come from nowhere. This has been the vision, the plan of the church from the very beginning. And yet every generation, always painfully aware of this, that we're always like one generation away from the gospel dying out and no one hearing it. That each and every generation has this call to pick up that torch and continue to move this thing forward so that others might know Christ.
Yeah, I want to be really clear on this. I get asked this all the time. I think this is maybe a really helpful spot to talk about this. I get asked all the time, would you ever, like, can a site ever become its own independent thing? I say absolutely. Like, the only thing that matters to me is not like how many sites of Forward Church there are. Mm-hmm. If there is if we come to an understanding that, hey, it would be better for the kingdom, more people would be reached for Jesus by all of our sites being independent entities, I'm all for that. Mm-hmm. It's whatever draws and brings more people to Jesus that I care about, not however many sites make up Forward Church.
Yeah. And I think for those who have been around Forward for only a short period of time, I think it might be easy to look at the brochure and say, oh, okay, multiplying only equals more sites. But in previous years, we have supported other church plants.
There's a church in Baden right now that's got going. We've supported them to the point that we would gladly support and cheer on a church going. I already talked about Church of the City. Like, I can't say more definitively that I cheer them on. This is awesome. It's great. We love them and so excited about what God has done there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really cool that, like, Spencer, he was on staff here. Yep. Now he's there. And this idea that, Pastor Andrew is now, started here, has actually had a couple different titles at Forward over the years.
And we had the conversation with Andrew, and I know Andrew won't mind me sharing this, to say, hey, like, do you think it would be best to plant a new church? Do you have a different vision of what church should look like that maybe doesn't really jive with Forward, but is going to be what's best to reach people in Brant County? Or do you want to do it as a site? He was like, no, I love what we're about as a church, and I want to see that take place in Brant County.
Yeah. So all of these different church leaders have been in different roles and part of Forward. And this has been something that is really important, that we are raising up leaders, and people are going to shift into different roles as the Holy Spirit guides. And what we see in Romans 10, the Apostle Paul is talking about, hey, there are people who are going to need to go and preach the word, or we're going to have to send people in an obstacle to the spread of the gospel. And this is, I think of it in terms of maybe a little bit of an internal obstacle to the church in general, is, are we raising up leaders to go and preach the gospel? I'll add a clarifying parentheses in here. This is not just paid pastoral staff that we want to raise up, that everyone is called to share the gospel. But I do think it's helpful for us to narrow that focus into this idea of, okay, there are going to be some people who are going to enter into this vocationally. Whether that is bivocational, that means it's just on a part-time basis while they work somewhere else, or full-time ministry. It's important that we are raising people into certain key roles, and that's a certain aspect of our Christmas projects. And so can you explain a little bit more? We have an internship program. How has that gone over the past few years, and where do we see that going from here?
Yeah, we've had a few interns now over the past few years, and a couple of those are now on staff full time. Matt came on as an intern at our Kitchener site as a worship leader, is now continuing to lead worship and the worship ministry in Kitchener, but also 3/4 of his time oversees our communications here at Forward Church as a whole. Nate came on as a youth intern and is now one of our full-time youth ministry directors. And then we've had interns like Laura Tucker, who has served in a variety of ways and continues to be deeply involved around here at Forward Church. Tammy Bull is currently one of our interns, and this goes to, like, internship is not about an age, right? It's about wanting to train up anybody who God is laying a call on. And when Tammy was first asking about this role, that was one of her concerns. And I was like, no, this is not about an age. Like, if you feel like God is moving and calling you into some type of vocational ministry, we want to give a platform and a space for you to explore how God has wired you in that, and to be able to bless you by giving some experience, some hands-on experience and some learning opportunities, so you're equipped to do whatever God calls you into in the future ministry he has. So she's doing community outreach right now. And we have Bethany Clemens, who is serving as a youth intern at the moment as well. And then we've got, there's a huge need. We do need people who are going to mobilize the mission moving forward. All of the stats tell us that we have a need already that's only going to grow going into the future as more current leaders retire out of full-time roles. And that's just to keep going what we currently do, not to see the mission move forward.
Yeah, that's just to keep the status quo.
Keep the status quo
of churches that already exist.
We're at a deficit already
Yeah.
that we have to fix in terms of trained leaders. And part of our problem is, depending on what you read, there are some stats out there that say that 85% of people who feel called into full-time vocational ministry and enter into ministry drop out within the first 5 years. One of the things that having an intentional internship program helps us do is it's one thing to get the head knowledge in a seminary or Bible college. It's another thing to be on the ground with support, operating with a bit of a safety net and other people around you to help you grow into that role, so that when you go out, you're not going to flame out. Yeah, when you're on your own. And I think that's a huge part of what internships help to do, is they help to really fully prepare people to enter into vocational ministry in a way that just going through schooling is not going to do.
Absolutely. I've mentioned this before, but I was an intern at Forward way back in the day. Steve Adams invited me to do a 1-year internship, and I said, what is that? What's an internship? I didn't even know at that time. After that, I got an internship somewhere else as well for about 6 months. And all of that was a huge blessing as I went into vocational ministry, realizing, hey, these are these moments I got this opportunity to learn and train with people who've been in ministry for many, many years, and take that into this next step of leadership. Incredibly important. But let's try to keep moving us along here, but I do want to address the question of if someone's listening to this and they're hearing that of internship, and there is a growing deficit of leadership in the church, and that includes, I would say, vocational and lay leadership as well. I don't know of any church. Every church leader I talk to says they could use more leaders, whether that as an elder or as a ministry leader. Every leader I talk to is like, we're trying to raise up more people to step into this. If someone's listening and they're trying to discern if they should pursue leadership or vocational ministry, what are some steps you think that they should take in that discernment process?
I'm going to give you like three quick steps. There's probably more things you could do, but let me make it really easy. One, ask other people to pray alongside you. And if you're starting to feel a tug on your heart, if you're in Kitchener, talk to Pastor Daryl. If you're here in Cambridge, talk to myself or Pastor Kirk or any staff member that you're close to. We would love to sit down and be a part of that discerning process with you, praying with you. I definitely am. I am convicted that I need to call people to consider this more frequently. Somebody just challenged me on it again last week at convention. How often am I challenging people to consider whether God might be calling them into vocational ministry? And I don't think I've done it enough. So I want to challenge you to consider that first. Take it to the Lord. If you feel like he's prompting you, then sit down with somebody. If you think, well, I don't know, but I definitely know I want to grow as a leader. Hey, we have a leadership school. Mm-hmm. We would love to have you be a part of the next cohort. That'll start up next September. Get that on your calendar. Get ready. Put your application in when we put it out. We would love to have you be a part of the next cohort. I'm really excited. We're in our 4th cohort now, and it is so neat to see how so many of those leaders have now stepped into new and bigger roles. And we're going to need more ahead if we're going to see more churches planted. Mm-hmm. We have a whole new group of leaders who are now leading and going to be leading in Brant County, and it's exciting to watch them step up and really sink their teeth into ministry there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part of it I would add to it is if you're looking at leadership, part of it is serving faithfully where you're at.
Yep.
If you're trying to discern, hey, is that next step going to make sense? Is where you're currently serving, are you serving there with joy? Maybe you're wanting to serve and you find yourself here in the wrong seat. That's, again, the conversation of maybe you need to move into a different area of ministry, all that discernment process, but continue to serve with joy. And honestly, as I think about leaders and people stepping up, that's often the thing I look towards is like, hey, who just seems to be really enjoying what they're doing. And often that's the person who probably wants to take on that next step of leadership within the church, or maybe God's going to be calling them to somewhere else entirely. Yep. The last thing I want us to look into is this idea of being a sending church, a church that is committed to sending. And I think that all of this ties into the Christmas projects. I'm thinking through particularly, we have our community outreach programs that we're raising funds for throughout all of this. And so I know that we have 3 things that we're going to be doing each year. We have the block party. That's my favorite one because it has hot dogs and bouncy castles. Okay. That one's really fun. Yep. And then we have Sharing Christmas. Which this year is, I know what we're doing at Kitchener. At Cambridge, you guys are going to be doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, we're doing workshops here to help. People are going to come in and kind of make a gift with their own hands that they can give to a loved one, especially in a time where economically it's challenging for a lot of people. But one of the most meaningful things oftentimes that people receive is a gift made with the efforts of the loved one who's giving it to them. And we also want to take some time within that to just really set the holiday spirit. There'll be some carolers going around during the thing. We're going to have a lunch, and we'll have an opportunity to share what really is at the heart of Christmas and the gift that was shared with us from God through Jesus, that we now want to be able to share out with the world as we share gifts. So
and then at Kitchener, we're doing Sharing Christmas as well. It's a little bit different. We're focused more on partnering with families connected with Safe Families. We're going to have a meal, but we're also going to be very similar, building, making some crafts, and it's going to be lots and lots of fun. And then in the springtime, we have we're beginnings of an idea of this spring project that we're going to be doing, where we're hoping to mobilize and send people out into the community as well. And that is something completely new for us at Forward. And so that's going to be kind of getting built up over the next few weeks and few months as we get ready for.
We're just going to mobilize as many people as possible. I'm hoping that everybody who listens to this podcast and most people who call Forward Church their home are going to set aside some time in April to just go out, spend a few hours in a day on a Saturday, and just serve in the name of Jesus in our community.
And so whenever I talk with people about the Christmas projects, all of these things have dollar amounts attached to them.
Yep.
And I don't want to gloss over that is really important that we're raising funds for this.
Yep.
I think it's also important in this is that pretty much all of these things that we're doing, like this is a question I get asked all the time of like, well, if I can't give, can I get involved?
Yep.
And I think that pretty much every project that we have this year, we can get involved
Yep.
at some level.
For sure.
In each of these. Like if you want to the easiest one I think is the community engagement.
Sure.
Like we have like sharing Christmas is coming up. Like we want people to serve.
Yep.
Like if you want to be directly involved in the things that the Christmas Projects is doing, you can do that.
Yep.
If you want to be involved in church planting, go talk to Khalil or Andrew, and you can be involved probably in their site. I think Andrew's okay if you show up at his site.
I know you may not speak Arabic, but I know Khalil would be happy for you to go around, make any connections with Arabic people that you know to him, hand out stuff to Arabic people to say, hey, we've got a service for you. I know he'd be all in on that.
Oh, yeah. And the reality is, a lot of people who are going to that site also speaking.
Yes, they do.
Like they, at some level, there's going to be, differences there. But maybe it is applying to serve at camp this year. Maybe like that's like all of this. Like I know like that's one thing I always have that response back is like, can I get involved? I just want to serve with my hands. And this is not meant to be a barrier of saying no. In fact, we're raising funds so that you can. Use your hands and feet and serve in the church and in the community in really meaningful ways. But the other thing I always hear around this time, and I'll try to land a plane with a really big question.
Okay.
And then we'll wrap it up from here. But this idea that whenever we roll out the Christmas projects of saying, hey, this is what Jesus is leading us to, often this is a time where I'll hear someone say that this is where we're going to experience as a church or in our personal lives, spiritual attack. That there's going to be something that's going to get in the way. As we talk about obstacles to the gospel going out, sometimes those obstacles are like, hey, we just got to get motivated. Like we just need to see the vision of what Jesus is calling us to. Like that's a hurdle we have to encounter. But there's also this other obstacle of, hey, there's a spiritual force that doesn't want the gospel to spread. And so walk us through that. Like, how should we picture this of, should we expect a spiritual attack when Jesus is on the move? Or are we just blaming hiccups on something that isn't actually a spiritual attack? Like, how do we discern that?
Both are true. Both are true. Like, I want to be overly. I don't want to negate the fact that I think there's times where we point at things or spiritual attack that are just like part of life in this world.
Right.
Sometimes things don't go according to plan. Sometimes things don't go right. But absolutely, we have an enemy who stands in opposition. The last thing that Satan and his demons want is for people to hear the name of Jesus proclaimed, because they know that that's what saves captives from hell and releases them to heaven. So we're absolutely at war. As Paul makes very clear in Ephesians 6, we go out into battle. We need to put our armor on as we go into battle. And I can tell you, like, there's so many good things going on at Forward Church right now. Like, Jesus is at work in so many different ways in the lives of people. We've seen so many people over this past year make decisions to come to Jesus. We've seen so many people be freed and begin to experience the freedom from addictions in Jesus. Marriages healed, family relationships healed, people baptizing and just fully committing themselves to walk in the way of Jesus. And at the same time, there's probably in my time here now, 13 years, I've never experienced a harder year. I've never experienced a harder year with difficult things going on in the lives of people in our church. Times where Satan just seems to want to stir up division between people over the dumbest stuff, because that's what he does. He sows division. He spreads lies. He's an accuser. When Satan gets into stuff, this is the way he mucks things up, right? And then just in the lives of our staff, I mean, most people probably are not aware that almost every single person on our staff has dealt with some incredibly difficult things in their personal life this year. and it has been a heavy year for our staff. So there is no doubt we are up against an enemy who's opposing us. But the good news for us is that he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. And the victory is already won. And when Jesus says, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, the gates are defensive mechanisms. It's not that Satan is on the offense and we're on the defense. We're just trying to hold out until the end. It's that Jesus is building a church and we go forward with power. And even when we're banging up against the obstacles, that's the gates, we can be assured that when the power of Jesus comes up against them, those gates will fall.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's so helpful in visualizing what Multiply is all about. It is not about being insular, about just kind of protecting ourselves, but instead it is about going out into the world, and that means we're going to engage in some spiritual battle. It also means that we're engaged in just plain old battle of dealing with, renting facilities. I would not say that's a spiritual battle. That might feel like that when it's frustrating, but the reality is just like overcoming obstacles that get in the way, and yet we're just trusting that the Holy Spirit is guiding and leading us in all of this. And so I just want to land the plane there. I just want to encourage the church to really consider what God is calling you to do during the season. Maybe it is, maybe you are in a spot where you can give generously and multiply. Maybe it's you can participate in these different projects we have going, but I really do want to encourage everyone to be praying as we talk about, if we want to take that seriously, that as the church moves, as the Holy Spirit's guiding, that we'll face spiritual attacks. So we need to be on our knees. We need to be praying and trusting that the Holy Spirit is guiding and leading us. And so I want to end us there. I want to thank everyone for listening, tuning into the podcast this week, and hopefully you can join us next week as we officially kick off our Christmas series. And we're going to be in the book of Luke for our Christmas series. Really looking forward to it, and I'll see you all next week.